Welcome to the Jump Ball Podcast. I'm your host, Mo Dakiel, and today my guest is Ben Golliver from Sports Illustrated. He's the co-host of the Open Floor Podcast, and if you remember, last week I had his partner, Andrew Sharp, on talking about the Eastern Conference, so I figured it'd be fair to give Ben a platform to talk about the Western Conference. So, you ready to tip it off? Ben, how you doing?
I'm good. I heard Andrew came on here trying to steal my thunder, so I'm here to reclaim my blocks, reclaim my territory, and talk a little hoops with you.
Yeah, I couldn't allow it. I felt like I might have betrayed you by just having one side of the SI Open Floor Podcast and felt like I needed to get the second side out right away. And I figured let's just jump going into the Western Conference.
Well, look, now I know how Kobe and Shaq felt or how Steph and KD feel. Everyone's always trying to break them up and create drama in the marriage. Look, our union is strong, okay? You can't pull us apart, and I'm glad he was able to come on and talk some hoops with you too.
Perfect. Well, let's go into the Western Conference. Like I did with Andrew, I want to go through it by division. And, we got to start out with the Pacific Division. It's the one with, the biggest names really in the NBA. What teams are you most excited about and in that division? Sorry.
Yeah, I mean, no question, it's going to have to be the Lakers. I think they're the biggest story in the NBA, bar none. I mean, that doesn't necessarily mean they're going to be a contender or anything else, but I think they're ground zero for the league right now. You've got too many storylines to even encapsulate in a short, segment. I mean, you've got LeBron, new chapter of his career. You've got a whole bunch of veterans who are almost like the hazing committee at a fraternity trying to take care of some of these young guys. If it's Lance or, Michael Beasley or Rajon Rondo kind of, looming as impediments for some of these young guys to, to break through and really become the players the Lakers drafted them to be. And then you've got a whole bunch of these prospects who are really talented and interesting and intriguing guys. And some may hit and some may not. And some may fit with LeBron and some may not. So you've got massive X factors with Ingram and Lonzo Ball. I think you've got some really, nice pieces with Hart and Kuzma who might actually fit better, early in the season and kind of hit the ground running, playing alongside LeBron. And then you've just got that, age divide, which is going to loom over everything between sort of the two halves of the Lakers roster. I think it winds up putting Luke Walton in kind of the trickiest spot of anybody. He's got, two very smart but also kind of hard-headed lead ball handlers with LeBron and Rajon Rondo. He is doing everything they can to, kind of pump up Rondo as a leader here early on in the season at training camp and at media day. And we'll see how long that sticks because we know Rondo's track record's not always the best. But those are just some of the storylines. And, can they get into the playoffs? Are they going to be on that crazy bubble in the Western Conference, which is always, super packed? Can they win a playoff series? Is LeBron going to be able to carry a team through the West like he did, year after year through the East? I mean, that's an awful lot of, interesting storylines and concepts to kind of dig into for just one team.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's more than enough for any team, really. It's probably a normal thing for LeBron at this point, but that is definitely a gamut of stories. It's been a long time since the Warriors have kind of played second fiddle to the spotlight in the Pacific Division too. So this has been I kind of think the Warriors are happy about it. Like let the light be shining bright in LA and let us kind of go about our thing. Question for you about Lonzo though, real quick, is any idea when he might come back? I've heard some stuff where he's not ready right now, obviously, for the start at camp, but is there any questions he's going to be ready for the start of the season with that knee surgery he had?
Yeah, they're being a little bit vague, but he's not participating in the contact portions or the 5-on-5 stuff at camp. So that leads you to believe he's at least a couple weeks away. They've already sort of hinted that Rondo will be the starter to kind of open the season. So maybe that suggests that Lonzo won't be at 100%, ASAP. But I think my takeaway was Rondo was probably going to start anyway because you gave him quite a bit of money. He's the veteran, and you really have to worry about him being engaged and, fully locked in, even if he does start. But if you try to bring him off the bench to start the season, I think you'd have some real, motivation issues or just, kind of unhappiness to deal with in the locker room. So it doesn't surprise me at all that they're going to go with Rondo to start. And they've got a bunch of backcourt options. I mean, the Lakers have been really preaching about their depth, and it's not like, high level depth. It's not like they're going to be a contender. They're so deep. They're ready to win like 60 games, but they do have a lot of bodies who can contribute. And, if Lonzo starts slow or if they need to work him in gradually, I think they've got some other players who are totally capable of filling minutes.
Yeah, no, it's going to be a fun season. You can feel the excitement in LA with LeBron and that whole thing. I'm very excited for the Michael Beasley and JaVale McGee era in LA. I think it'll be an interesting season with those guys. It's a
hey Mo, on the excitement factor, the Lakers told me that they got more than 200 and nearly 300 credential requests for media day. So I mean, that's apparently it's an all-time modern record, or the most they've seen in recent memory. And they couldn't confirm if it was the all-time record, but you would assume that it would be. I mean, LeBron was facing a wall of cameras, probably 20 to 30 video cameras. All of his comments were being carried live on national TV. It was a spectacle. That's how they started the season on media day. And by the way, nobody said anything interesting really on media day. It was a very buttoned up production, right? So that tells you the craziness is just getting started.
Yeah, it was super planned, and the Laker PR group should get ready, because I imagine that's going to be the norm pretty much on a daily basis for them in terms of games and all that fun request. I mean, they've even stopped speed chases to carry LeBron's words over on media day. I made that up, by the
way. but they would. I mean, LeBron is absolutely the story right now, and Luke Walton's throwing in the Kobe Bryant comparisons in terms of their work ethic and how they carry themselves around the younger players. And it's a fascinating dynamic. I had a scout tell me this past week, he's like, look, if you drop the Lakers in the Eastern Conference, they're probably going to the Eastern Conference Finals, if not the Finals, right? And is this team right now, top to bottom in LA, more talented and potentially more cohesive and better, despite all of the questions that we've already raised, than last year's Cavaliers team? And when you look back at what a train wreck that season was in terms of the injuries, the trades, so many guys just turning in underwhelming performances, I think there's a real case to be made that, LeBron almost upgraded his station in life. Now, of course, by going to the Western Conference to do that, he's also most likely taken himself out of the title contention conversation. But I do think that's a healthy, bit of perspective to drop into this. Is it's going to take them a while to kind of figure it all out. But Luke Walton and LeBron both have some real pieces here to kind of put things together and turn this into a successful team.
Yeah, no, definitely. Let's talk about some of the other teams in this conference. We don't need to talk about Sacramento, because let's just be honest, they're going to be terrible again. Unless you want to. I don't see anything about Sacramento that's interesting.
I think it's, a huge X factor for this season is like, can Fox become a real NBA player? I mean, as a rookie, he was awful. And of course, that's kind of to be expected given his size and, it's kind of a slight frame and, all the other questions that kind of exist about, trying to be a point guard in the NBA from day one. He needs to make a major leap in year two, because if you don't have a point guard in the NBA, you're basically screwed, right? I mean, we've seen that for team after team after team. And if you invest a lottery pick in a guy like Fox, he better pan out for you. Otherwise, you're setting your franchise back multiple years. You look at the rest of that roster, one of the worst collections of talent in the league to me. They've got a few nice players, a Bogdanovich, a couple other guys who are maybe giving you rotation minutes on a good team. You could probably stick Buddy Hield in a reserve role on certain teams that he'd be okay. They've got an awful lot of redundant parts, an awful lot of guys who just have not developed the way that they thought they would, coming out of the draft. And so I think, to me, I'm watching, can Fox make the leap? And then what does Bagley look like? I have my suspicions that he's really going to struggle, in terms of adjusting to the NBA world. I mean, I think he can probably get some points, put up some numbers. But I'm worried he's one of those guys where his stats are not going to translate to winning, especially right out of the gate. And so I think that's two good reasons to watch Sacramento. But it's the type of team where you might check in on them 15 times a year. They're not exactly a night to night watch.
Yeah. Quick thoughts on Phoenix and the Clippers?
Well, Phoenix kind of confuses me with everything they're trying to do, because they're hitting the accelerate button by getting some of these veterans, whether it's Ariza or Ryan Anderson. I do think those moves will help both Booker and Ayton, kind of find a cleaner fit here. But I just think long term, even say after the deadline, like, are those guys still there? Are they trying to like trade those guys to a contender who's looking to fill a hole? I mean, how much are they really expecting to win this year with this group? I mean, to me, Ariza's probably lost about a half step from a few years ago, and then Anderson has definitely regressed. So while they're very clean fits on paper, I think when I look at that just entire roster, I don't think they really answered a lot of their questions about who's going to be their core going forward. Like, it's still Booker, Ayton, and then a whole bunch of sort of wild card, question mark type players. And then you throw on top of that the biggest question, which is they probably have the worst point guard rotation in the entire league, right? I mean, and if they're going to try to play Booker at the point guard full time, I don't think that's going to work very well. And I think there might be some temptation, like you bring in Ariza, you bring in Anderson, and you think, hey, will you just turn Booker into James Harden and we can try to mimic what they're doing in Houston? Booker is not that level of a playmaker for his teammates. He's not that level of a passer. Harden is, a top 5 passer in the NBA, like, period. And Booker is nowhere near that. So I just worry that their offense is still going to struggle. I have real questions about how ready Ayton is to be an impact player, both offensively and defensively. I worry about his turnovers, as a rookie. I think they really need to keep a lot of shooters on the court to make sure he has space to work in. Otherwise, I think he's going to be pretty easy to take away. And then defensively, I just wasn't very impressed at Summer League. I thought he was a half step late to everything at Summer League, and that makes me concerned there's going to be foul trouble issues and that, their defensive, problems they've had for years down there are just going to continue. But, at the same time, like, I think the biggest story about Phoenix actually doesn't have anything to do with Phoenix. I think it's Luka Doncic. It's like if he comes out and just kills it in Dallas, their whole season will be defined by that. And you can actually say the same thing, frankly, for Sacramento as well, because they passed on Luka too. If Luka comes in and is the rookie of the year and looks that amazing, both those GMs are going to be looking around trying to explain, like, what the heck happened on draft night.
Same thing for the Hawks too. And I'm a huge Luka fan. Like, I actually think that's probably what's going to happen. Like, I think they've made a mistake taking Ayton over Doncic, just because I think the way the NBA is now, you want to pair these guys with multiple ball handlers on the court. We saw what Houston did with Chris Paul and James Harden and stuff like that. I think having a guy like Doncic paired with Booker just really opens things up for Booker and makes things a lot easier. Perimeter defenses can't just key in just on him. They got to account for Doncic as well. And I think that's the mistake they made. Like, I think, they went with Ayton. I'm like you. I wasn't impressed with his summer league. I thought he didn't play with enough force. For a big man, I expect him to have some sort of presence on the court, and I didn't really feel like he did. And I just think Doncic is going to make a lot of GMs look bad at the end of this year.
For sure. I mean, I also think, like, Igor, we don't totally know the book on Igor as a head coach. If he finds ways to really get good stuff out of Ayton in year one, that's going to be, like, just a huge feather in his cap, because how many young centers who are kind of raw on offense, he can shoot it a little bit, but I mean, he's not a guy you're going to be like dumping the ball to on the block and saying, like, go power through 2 guys and score, or like anything like that, right? If he finds a way to keep him active and efficient on offense, that would be a huge feather in his cap, because how many young bigs really succeed without a true point guard setting them up, or a true lead guard who can set them up? And, like, I think Booker can run some high pick and roll with him, right? But, like, aren't you just worried that Ayton's going to be out there going through the motions, not touching the ball, not getting the ball in good percentages, forcing things, finding himself, trapped at times and, forced to just pass the ball out to, just kick out and, try to do his work on the glass? I mean, that's kind of what I expect in year one. I'd love to be proven wrong, but I'm definitely in the Ayton skeptics camp.
Yeah. Real quick with the Clippers, their names being floated around with Jimmy Butler, which we're going to get to the whole Butler fiasco pretty soon. What do you think with their season? I mean, they're kind of a rebuild / trying to compete at the same time sort of mode, it feels like. What are your thoughts with the Clippers going into the season?
Yeah, I mean, you said it. They're kind of a team without. Do they know if they're coming or are they going? They don't really know that. That's what happens when you lose basically 3 All NBA players, Chris Paul, Blake Griffin, and DeAndre Jordan in a short time period. And like all those things happened at kind of different increments, right? Like Paul left, then Blake gets traded, then DeAndre left. So it wasn't like all in like one clean go. But just step back and ask yourself, like, how many teams ever can recover from that level of talent departure, right? And you can definitely defend the Blake trade. You can definitely say, hey, it was the right decision to move on from DeAndre, who I didn't think was actually that good last year. I think he's starting to show some, age-related slippage a little bit. Either that or he just wasn't motivated. I mean, his numbers in terms of rim protecting, like how many shots is he contesting, how many blocks is he getting, what kind of a percentage is he allowing around the basket? I mean, they were way off from previous seasons. So I think everything they did was sort of defensible in trying to retool their roster. But that just gives you a hard ceiling when that much talent leaves, right?
Yeah.
So to me, this is the classic season of, you start playing the veterans early. Half these guys are going to get injured because they get injured every year, whether it's Gallinari or Beverly. And then the second half of the season winds up being a more developmental time where you get some guys like Shea or even Tyrone Wallace, who I really like as kind of a rotation guard. You just get them some developmental minutes and see who pops and, kind of go for it that way. I totally get their interest in Jimmy Butler because that would be a foundational player who they could try to use to really, package together like a superstar combination, next summer. I mean, obviously, Jerry West is going to be looking to do stuff like that. But we'll see if they can get him. I mean, that's not an easy thing to do. I think one other big question is like, what's Tobias Harris's future? I think they like Tobias Harris, but I wonder if they like him enough to pay full price next summer for whatever he's going to get. He's the type of guy where I would be very hesitant to throw that huge, 4-year, 5-year type contract at him. Like the offer that they reportedly made for him to me was already like pretty rich, like pretty rich for my blood. And, he's one of those guys where, he's never really won a playoff game. Like he's just never translated what he does well in a winning environment. And so from that standpoint, he could wind up either being a trade piece, down the road, or it could just be a kind of a rental.
Right. And again, I've said this many times. The rule is, though, if you trade Harris, Boban has to go with him. Or you sign him. It's a package thing. This is in the CBA. It's a small thing. It got slipped by a lot of people, but I caught it. It's in the CBA. He has to go with him. We need that pairing to stay together. I'd like them to have a TV show, to be honest.
I'd like them to have a time machine so we could actually get Boban on the court. I mean, imagine Boban. Really imagine him in like 2003 or 2004 NBA, right? Like it would be amazing. Like he would definitely have a role.
He'd be Sean Bradley, but wouldn't he just be Sean Bradley?
I think Boban's got some ball skills, man. Like he can actually do some. I mean, he's not like the most amazing player. Okay, I understand. I'm getting to the hype a little bit, but Boban can play, right? If the NBA style was where it was 12 to 15 years ago, Boban would be giving you real quality minutes. He'd be playing night in and night out, regardless of how slow he might be or all the other questions about, can he go defend in space and all that. He would have a role. Just unfortunately, right now, I just don't see it out there for him. But they've got, I mean, they really have a roster full of oddities too, don't they? I mean, it's like Montrez, is a very interesting player in small minutes. We mentioned some of the young guards they've got who are going to be, potentially really interesting. Like, Shea, you're not totally sure what's going to happen when you throw him out there to the Wolves, but boy, his body really pops when you watch him at Summer League. And, when you start to imagine what he could look like, 3-4 years just with that frame. They've got a lot of intriguing pieces.
The thing about Shea that really kind of worries me with the Clippers is they've not been known to really develop players. It's not like a development factory for players, and that's kind of my concern. And Doc's the kind of coach that, besides last year, last year might have been an anomaly, it might have proved Doc has changed, but he rarely played young guys. So it's one of those things where I'm a little bit concerned because I think the kid can play. I'm just curious how they're going to go about the development of Shea.
Well, let me speak on that real quick. So I did a story about the Clippers two-way guys last year, like Tyrone Wallace and a couple other guys. They were, doing all this crazy stuff, kind of shuttling them around back and forth between the G League. Lawrence Frank is really committed to the developmental aspect. And I think that there was all these talks about, they're stripping Doc of his front office duties or they're refashioning his role as Doc out the door. I think a big fundamental question behind all of that internal conversation was like, look, Doc, we're never going to get where we want to go as a franchise if we don't have the superstar players and we don't really commit to the young guys. And so I think that they kind of had the come to Jesus moment a little bit last year on that. Now, that doesn't mean they're going to become like the Philadelphia 76ers process, right? Where they're like just handing out these crazy 4-year contracts to like second round picks and like trying to go all in on that. But I do think that they've really, unless they're just very good at BSing me, I think they've really committed to that to a certain degree. So I think guys like Shea and Wallace, who I mentioned earlier, are going to get some chances to show what they could do. And same thing with Montrez as well. Like, I look at Gortat, to me, he's definitely slipped. Like, John Wall caught a lot of crap for not being a very good leader and calling out Gortat at times last year. I don't think he should have said what he said. That doesn't mean he was wrong.
Right,
Gortat's not the same guy he was a couple years ago, right? So that opens up some minutes for, Montrez, and you see how much can he give you? Is he just this energy, smaller, minute player, or can he scale that up into, maybe a starting type role, or at least starters type minutes? I think that's an interesting question for them too. So, they have a lot going on, but I think ultimately the real takeaway from this season is they're counting down to next summer, or they're counting down to when they can make that big blockbuster move for a guy like Jimmy, where they can get into recruitment mode so that they can, build around stars. I think that's ultimately what they want to do, because that's what, delivered so much success for them during the Lob City era. And Steve Ballmer wants to win. He's not a patient guy. He wants to have a really good team that he can be proud of, that he can talk trash about the Lakers too. He wants to be up there in the mix as the best team in LA. And I think that transition is going to take a little while to pan out.
Yeah, I mean, they've basically been relegated to another almost the G League with the arrival of LeBron. So I can see the need of him wanting to, of Ballmer and the organization really wanting to make a splash and get in there, and that's where the Jimmy Butler stuff comes into. Let me ask you this question. This is going to be a bit of an odd question, and you'll understand why after that. But would every player in that conference, in that division, pick 3 guys you want to jump into a photo booth with?
Jeez. Well, I guess Boban is the most obvious. I mean, do I even need 2 others, or am I good?
I don't know if you could fit 2 others, but
well, wait. Can I get Yogi Ferrell in there?
In that division, is Yogi Ferrell? Isn't he still with the Mavs?
Oh, for some reason I thought he was with the Kings. I'm gonna have to fact check myself live on this podcast.
I got it while you think.
Okay, let me think. Who else? I mean, it's hard to not take LeBron, right? Maybe I'm going LeBron.
You can go Yogi Ferrell. You're right. He is with the Kings.
Okay, that's what I'm doing. So I'm going to set the photo up so LeBron and I are standing normally. He's a few inches taller than me, but it's not, not comically different. So I'll be on the far left, then LeBron, then we're going to have Boban, then we're going to have Yogi Ferrell. So we can get the solid, 16 inches of difference in height. And then we're just going to leave it up to the photographer to figure out how he's going to frame that photo, who gets cut off or where. I think that's my squad.
Okay, well, I'm going Boban too, just because I'm a big fan of Boban. I'm going Beasley just because who knows what you're going to get out of that. And
yeah,
the third spot I'm kind of struggling a little bit with, but I think at the end of the day, I'm going to go ahead and just embrace the full thing and go JaVale McGee.
Oh, I see. All right. Well, you're almost recreating the photo the Lakers had for Media Day, the meme team photo, which was just going crazy.
Right.
It was really something to watch those guys all come out in their yellow jerseys. I mean, I described it as kind of like cognitive dissonance just in every direction. Like, it was just looming over us. I mean, Rondo and Lakers yellow was super weird. But then Beasley, I mean, you knew it was coming with Beasley, JaVale McGee, and Lance, right? But when they're all lined up side by side, I mean, it was really something else. These guys open their preseason here in a couple of days. I cannot wait to see what they look like on the court. I mean, they looked so ridiculous, in the practice facility all together. I can't wait to see what it looks like when they're a 5-man group running up and down.
It's going to be great. I'm with you. I can't wait. And the reason why I brought up the photo booth, Ben, is because I need to talk about my guys at brandactivemedia.com. They're the company that does those photo booths at weddings, at big-time events. They've been at the NFL Draft, the LA Galaxy, the NBA All-Star Game. I'm shocked no NBA teams had them at media day. Why not have a little goofy picture with your guys and do all that stuff? But they do a lot of great things. You can always pair your pictures and put it right up into social media. Let them know that Mo from the Jump Ball sent you, and you'll be able to print all your pictures for free. Again, Brand Active Media. Ben, let's jump into the let's go Northwest Division, because there's been a lot of noise from that division lately. And you can't talk about that division without going first into the chaos in the Minnesota Timberwolves. I have my phone up literally because I'm expecting Jimmy Butler to get traded at any moment. I've heard you on the Open Floor podcast. I also caught you on the Howard Beck one. Where do you think Jimmy's going? This morning they came out with, Miami is his real top preference right now. Where do you think he's going?
I mean, I think that when you look at which teams would be motivated to trade for him at this point, it's teams that don't have a foundational superstar. It's teams that can afford to take a risk because they're kind of stuck in the middle of their conferences. They need to have a defining type player. It's teams who want to be movers and shakers in terms of attracting other talent, and they would view Jimmy as the guy who could maybe do that for him. It's teams that don't have a lot of, short-term expectations. Like, you bring him in, now all of a sudden your team is, a month or two behind every other team in terms of preparing for the season. So you have to be okay with, losing some games early in the year to kind of make it work, right? And to me, that's why the Heat and the Clippers really both fit that perfectly. I mean, if I was a contender, I'd be real nervous about trying to rent him and parting with anything worthwhile. He's not the easiest player to fit into a rotation, and he wants to be the man. I mean, I think we've learned that pretty clearly. Like, he wants to be the superstar, the face of a team, right? So those are the two teams I would circle that just make more sense. I think if you're a really bad team like the Knicks or Nets, it makes a little bit less sense because you'd be a little more worried that whether you'd be able to re-sign him or not, next summer, or whether he would just do to you what he's just done to the Timberwolves. I mean, I think at this point, though, the big takeaway from the Butler saga is that I'm ready to write the Timberwolves out of the playoffs already. I don't see how they make it. I mean, Their team is not very deep. We saw that they were basically a 30-ish win team when Butler was off the court last year. They did not play very well when he was injured, even though Towns did a nice job of stepping up down the stretch. They just don't have enough to keep up in the Western Conference if they don't have Butler. And, I think the best they can hope for at this point is maybe like a Josh Richardson type or a Justice Winslow, that kind of package coming back from Miami. I think that that would be a fine way to save face. And I think that their coaching staff, their general manager, and their owner are all going to be looking to save face. They're going to want to have a trade package that they can sell to the media as not being, we didn't just get hijacked or leveraged by our star, because, they're very sensitive about that up there. But, even if you throw those guys on there in a best case scenario onto their roster, I don't see that team being able to keep up with the top 8 in the West.
Yeah, I think they're with you. I'm with you on they're out of the playoff race with especially without Jimmy. The real question I also have is this going to be Tibbs' last year? I mean, is he going to make it through the year?
I mean, I think that he has to be held accountable for at least part of this saga. I thought, Butler's conduct was, Kawhi level bad in terms of waiting this long to go public with the issues. If you knew you wanted out, you should have said so in June or July. It's not that complicated. You would have already been traded by now. I think the NBA has evolved here in the last couple of years where, like, superstars, if they don't want to be there, instead of like fighting that, even the most stubborn and proud general managers realize that it doesn't do you any good to have a disgruntled superstar. So you just trade him, right? And we've seen a lot of examples where teams have traded those guys and gotten some pretty good young packages to put together and give themselves a different look. And so it's just sort of, standard operating procedure at this point. Why do you wait until September to go public with it? I think it's a bad look for Jimmy. But I do think, when Tibbs makes that kind of all-in trade for Butler last summer, his primary goal is to keep Butler happy, to make sure that his franchise guy is motivated and locked in and committed to the team, right? And if he felt that starting to waver a little bit, if Butler was communicating those kinds of thoughts with him, he's not in a position where he can just be in denial about it or pretend that it's not happening. He really has to own that and do what's best for the franchise. And to me, it sounds more like he was in denial the whole way. He just thought it was basic grumbling and that things would just sort of work out in the end, or maybe that Jimmy would be loyal to him because he was so instrumental in giving Jimmy a start to his career. I mean, either way, that's a miscalculation. And I think, ultimately, Thibodeau gets knocked for sort of having these anachronistic approaches to like, minutes management and kind of how he handles his players. Like he's seen as this sort of old school traditional type guy. I think he got trapped a little bit in the old school mentality of just expecting that, star players would want to go out there and play. And I think, instead Butler's taking a very modern approach, which is like, I don't want to be here, move me immediately. And I don't think Thibodeau really ever saw this coming.
Well, I mean, it's funny because there were several grumblings, really even towards last year about there being unhappiness in that locker room and things like that. And then Jamal Crawford on the Howard Beck podcast also mentioned how kind of a weird that feeling he got from that organization from being in that locker room. I mean, he turned down money to come back, like he took, and still hasn't found a spot with the team. So I'm not totally, I would be shocked if it wasn't verbally, expressed to Tibbs several times that Butler's unhappy. I mean,
But what I'm saying is this is like, don't we still hold Butler accountable? Like if you were going to go public with it, if you're that upset, why don't you just go public in July, right?
Well, I think some of that has to do with the Karl Anthony Towns extension negotiations. I wonder if there was stuff. I mean, there were reports that Towns wasn't going to sign it until they got clarity of the Butler issue, and then I think So I wonder, kind of similar to Kyrie demanding a trade when he found out he was in trade talks in Cleveland. So I wonder if that has something to do with it, where Butler got some feedback of what was going on in those negotiations or what was being said, and he kind of just said, "Man, all right, well, screw it, I'm out, I'm done."
Yeah, I guess I would just say to that, why did he really want to be in Minnesota? He didn't get asked to get traded there, right?
Right.
I mean, they just traded for him. He obviously has designs on big market superstardom and all that stuff. That's never going to happen really in Minnesota. It's going to be very difficult to make that happen. There was all these chemistry questions last year that you mentioned with Karl Anthony Towns and Wiggins and everybody else. I didn't see those just magically getting resolved over the summer. Wiggins is already on the books for that preposterous contract, so you're pretty locked into who your group is, right? Like you're just kind of scrapping together a bench with like Luol Deng and whoever else you can find, right? Like the outlook in Minnesota was not that rosy to keep a star player regardless, right? So to me, whether Towns signs or he doesn't sign, how should that impact Jimmy? Like Jimmy had to assume, or his people had to assume, they were going to give Towns a max. I mean, that seems like an absolute no-brainer. Former number one pick, 2010 guy. Like you just do that. It shouldn't be that complicated of a negotiation. So I just think, to me, there was no reason this couldn't have been done in July. Like Jimmy knew or should have known the state of the chessboard at that time. And if he was this clear in September about wanting out, I don't see what could have changed. I mean, I understand that there was kind of some back and forth, but look, it's a pretty obvious thing. Like Minnesota's still in Minnesota. It's still going to be 15 degrees for 3 months or 4 months out of the year. And he's a Texas guy. He likes the warm weather. I mean, to me, it just feels off. The whole thing feels really kind of like off-brand or low rent, the way this has played out. I think that they should have handled this with a little bit more professionalism and pragmatism.
That's certainly fair. That's certainly fair. Let's talk about the other teams in the conference, because there's still several interesting teams. I mean, we got Denver, Oklahoma City, Portland, Utah. My question to you: who's the best of that four right there?
I think Utah. I mean, I really like what they're doing. I know it's a little bit different. They're zagging where everybody else is zigging. To me, it's so just reliable the way they're playing. The targeting of the role players that they do is just exceptional. In terms of just fitting guys into how they want to play. I mean, they're just kind of keep stocking these veteran guys. And you mentioned earlier about LA's problems, maybe developing guys. I mean, Utah has developed some really, really good players, right? Like we're going to give like Donovan Mitchell, like all this credit for like his breakthrough, and like he totally deserves it, but they've done a pretty nice job around the edges, finding guys like Royce O'Neal or whoever else who can give you good time. And plug and play and just be on, super bargain contracts, but, still make it work. I thought they got the best out of Ricky Rubio that we've ever seen last year. And then, of course, Gobert, to me, he's a top 15 player, right? And when he's on the court, he's excellent. Now, how much will that translate in the postseason? definitely a question mark. I mean, we saw them get picked apart and roasted pretty good by Houston last year. But I still think if I compare them to Oklahoma City, Portland, or Denver, I think all those teams have very serious postseason question marks too. And I think I would just default to Utah being the deepest, the most talented, the most clear identity of that group. And I think they're going to win the Northwest.
Yeah, I'm with you on Utah. I like them. I think a lot of it also really kind of depends on how much they can get out of Dante Exum. And a lot of it, as you always say, the biggest skill is availability. And he hasn't been available. Like, they need to be able to keep him on the court. I think he could really help them out, sort of in a Andre Robertson kind of role, just being a good defender. He's a better offensive player than Robertson, not a better shooter, but sleek. He can get to the rim and make some things happen. I think he's good defensively. I think they can go, pretty far in the playoffs, depending on a healthy Exum and how he kind of progresses here. And another guy.
Well, their fans love Exum too. I mean, he had some, nice moments in the postseason. Like when he is healthy, he shows you some flashes. He plays with a really nice pace, and he is definitely, more physical now than he was when he came into the league. And he got paid. So let's hope this is the year that it all comes together for him, But he's also one of those guys where, remember how we were talking ourselves into Alec Burks for like 3 straight years? It's like, oh, now he's going to be the player that Utah needs. Like, still waiting on that one. And I'm worried that Exum is just going to be in that camp too, but we'll see.
Fair enough. And then let me ask you, Portland, CJ or Dame, are you sticking with that pairing? Are you going to – this is your squad, man. This is your hometown team.
Come on, Mo. Stop trying to trade these guys, okay?
Okay, so you're not trading them.
No, look, they've got a roster from like 3 to 15. That's one of the worst, I would say, among playoff teams or like playoff hopefuls. Just so many limited guys. And they're also really, really young. I think I read that they're the youngest average team in the league, which is mind-blowing considering their 2 stars are like right in their primes. But I've made this point for a long time. If you've got, 2 guys who get along and they're both, CJ could be an all-star in the Eastern Conference. He'd be on that little borderline. Dame's clearly an all-star, all-NBA level type player. Why are you breaking that marriage up? If they work pretty well together, if they're able to play on quality defensive units like they were last year, these guys are not stoppers by any means, but they're also not holding Portland back from having a top 10 defense last year. To me, you keep that together. What's holding this roster back is the supporting cast. You saw it in the playoffs. Everybody wants to blame, Damian Lillard for kind of getting taken out by New Orleans' defense. And, Drew Holiday and Rondo, those guys did an amazing job. But it's easier to get taken away when you've got you're playing in lineups that have 2 or 3 just complete zeros on offense, right? Like guys you just cannot trust to keep a defense honest. And, if you put Damian, one thing I like to do is imagine him with, Kyrie's supporting cast in Boston, right? Like how good would Damian look? He would look very, very good. And, I think from that standpoint, you just keep trying to cycle those pieces. You keep just counting the days down until Evan Turner's contract is finally gone. But to me, I don't see a ton of ceiling with this group. I don't see any way they win a playoff series this year.
I don't think they make the playoffs.
Wow, well, that's not the world's hottest take because I've seen a bunch of the computers, the projection models agree with you. I guess I trust a little bit more in their guards than I do whatever San Antonio's up to and Minnesota. I view them as kind of like a 7 or an 8. I feel like they're probably going to get in over like a New Orleans. But look, one injury to one of those guards and they're toast. I think that's really where it would get dicey.
The thing for me with Portland and I got killed in my group chat because, he's not a name, but losing Ed Davis was a blow to them. He's their 3rd best rebounder, by just as close to being their 2nd best rebounder. They were a really solid defensive team, solid rebounding team last year. And I think he had a lot to do with that, kind of being in the right spots, rotating and things like that. And I think losing him is really kind of going to hurt him. The Zach Collins, I like him. I don't think he's ready to kind of be that guy. I don't feel like he's going to be that guy. He's a stretch big to me. So I kind of have them out just again because the West is also so much better this year.
No, I'm with you. I think their season, they are really needing Collins to take a huge step forward. That's asking a lot. I don't know how ready he is. And I also think just, do they make it? Do they not make it? I mean, I think they've been in that same mold here for 3 or 4 years, where if they do start off a little bit slow, or if they're like hovering around that 500 mark, all of a sudden the questions and the fan frustration around, where are we going? What's our direction? Being upset with the front office and, wondering about, Terry Stotts, is he on the hot seat? It could kind of, the deja vu could kind of set in a little bit, and now people are getting a little bit nervous about, are we wasting Lillard's prime? This trade talk, the stuff that you mentioned earlier, could really kick up. I think it has a potential to just be a little bit volatile up there. But you're right about Ed Davis. I think they got some good minutes last year from Shabazz Napier. I think along with Collins, the other guy you need to watch, would be, Curry, Seth Curry. I mean, they really need him to basically do what Shabazz did last year. If they take a big step back this year at that spot, I think that's going to be, another potential weakness. Can I give you a little trivia question I unearthed during the top 100 process?
Absolutely.
So Myers Leonard, their center, or I guess he's kind of a stretch four now, but they drafted him as a center. And I remember their front office would tell me, hey, we can kind of envision him with his athletic tools and his, body frame type, trying to become a Tyson Chandler type player in the NBA, right? How many shots did Myers Leonard block last season?
God,
do you know?
I'm going to just guess, and I think really I'm just basing my guess more on like how many times he did it by accident.
Okay.
I'm gonna say it's less than 30. No, that's still too high. I'm gonna say less than 20.
Okay, so he didn't actually play that many minutes last year. I think he was around like 250 minutes. He was getting a lot of DMPs. I think he had some injury issues too. But remember, this is a 7-foot guy who was in a slam dunk contest, coming up, super athletic freak, finisher, all these kinds of things when he was coming into the NBA. He's basically like 25, 26 right now. So he should be in his prime, right? He's had enough time to figure out NBA defenses. Myers Leonard didn't block a single shot last year. Zero.
I was almost going to say zero.
Zero. Can you believe that?
And how much are they paying him? Because he has one of those ridiculous contracts as well.
Yeah, I think it's 10+ million a year. So, again, but he's another guy where in that front court rotation, given Davis leaving, he could actually play some more minutes now too. Like I think I'd view him as what, like their fourth or, probably their fourth big, or, him or Swanigan. Those are clearly, very different looks, but we'll see. I mean, they've been waiting on him for a long time. And I think that's part of the issue too, with some of their stagnation that I mentioned earlier, is just like a lot of the young guys that they drafted and paid just never blossomed into their best case scenario. They just kind of hit walls at various points, whether it's him, they brought in Harkless super cheap, but he kind of hit a wall. They had Alan Crabb. They had to trade him for kind of cap reasons. I mean, they had a bunch of these guys who they were pretty excited about in the pipeline who all just kind of fizzled.
And that's what sucks there. And it happens sometimes with teams. You get excited about a guy and injuries, or just they just don't they're not. I'm rambling. They just don't get there. Oklahoma City, real quickly, how far do you think they can go? Can they challenge anybody in the West?
I like them a little bit better this year just because of the no Melo factor. I think it's going to allow Paul George to be more comfortable, but I think they have the same basic weaknesses that they've had, since KD left. I like the Schroeder pickup. I mean, I definitely think he's going to have a big impact. If I were them, I would use him off the bench no matter what. I would use him for all the minutes that Westbrook's off the court. I would always have either him or Westbrook on the court, because they just always lost those minutes without Westbrook just so badly these last couple of years. So I think he's actually going to have a big impact. I could see him potentially even kind of wiggling into the sixth man of the year conversation, depending on how well they play. And, I'm not sure what his numbers will be, but I could see people kind of making the case that, like, look how much better they are this year with their second unit than last year. But past that, I don't think that they have. I mean, it just starts to me and ends with Westbrook. I don't trust him to win more than one playoff series at this point. I think his style of play, it's phenomenally entertaining to watch. But there's just a hard cap on how far you can make it if you're playing that way, and you don't have another top 2 or 3 player like they had with Kevin Durant. So, to me, the farthest they're going to get is the second round. And I think if they did make the second round, they would most likely get embarrassed by Golden State or Houston. Like, I don't think those series would be close.
All right, that's fair enough with me. I think that's kind of where I'm at. I think they might be closer to Houston though than you think. I think they can probably Houston would still win the series, I think, but I kind of think they might be closer, especially if I'm a big Robertson fan. If he's healthy, I think he really adds another defensive element with him and PG and Steven Adams. I think the three of them can form quite a defensive tandem.
No, I'm with you. And it was a real bummer that he didn't play, in last year's playoffs, because they probably win that series if they have him. I mean, they don't have enough depth to sustain any kind of a hole. They're really kind of praying for perfect health to get into the postseason. I just view it as simple as like you can't break down that Houston Oklahoma City matchup into like position by position, head-to-head type matchups, because Houston plays as a 5-man unit. Like they're getting stuff from every single guy. Like the whole is greater than the sum of the parts, right? And for Oklahoma City, I've just been so frustrated that that's never really been the case, right? Like the whole is exactly equal to how well Westbrook's playing, right?
That's true.
Otherwise, it doesn't matter. And so I think, I'm also worried a little bit about Westbrook's health. That's got me a little bit nervous. And then also, just at some point, like his efficiency's already been slipping a little bit. Does that continue, right? Like at what point does he become sort of a different type of player where he's not that, MVP level guy he was a few years ago, or even, that truly explosive guy he was earlier in his career? Do we see any difference in terms of how he can impact games this season, especially with the knee thing looming kind of over everything? And that's kind of a question or a red flag to keep an eye on.
Certainly. And then last team in the conference, and then we'll fly through the other conference quickly because I know we're running a bit long. Denver, what? Every year, man, every offseason, I just hear constantly about how great Jokic is and everything like that. My thing is, if he's that great, he wins that last game of the season and gets the team into the playoffs. I'm sorry, and he's a problem defensively to the point that they took him out to put in Miles Plumlee, or one of the Plumlee's brothers. I don't know which one. I can't remember which one it is. And
it's Mason.
Sorry, Mason Plumlee. For defensive purposes. I mean, that says a lot because it's not like he's all that much of a defensive stud itself. In that game. What's your take on Denver? I think they can sneak into the playoffs this year, but I'm never as high on them as everybody else is. What's your take on that squad?
Well, fool me once, fool me twice, fool me 3 times. I'm pretty in on the Nuggets this year. There's been times in the past where I was kind of in the skeptical camp too. I just think that with Millsap back, with Murray another year older, with the chemistry these guys have already built up, and they've built up a lot of chemistry. I mean, their offense really runs well. I think that they have a chance to be in that group where, like, if they're just playing a random team from the Eastern Conference, like in the middle of February, like this is going to be the type of team that can just blow them off the court with their offense. And the questions about the defense are going to be, less critical than they've been in years past. I also think they're really going to be able to exert their home court advantage this year. And stack up wins just by, playing that clear style in their building and just, being super efficient and just winning shootouts, basically. To me, Millsap's health is a big factor. Hopefully he comes back and stays healthy. I mean, he hasn't been a guy who's, been out of the lineup very much over the course of his career. He had that one big issue last year. I think that took a lot of the wind out of their sails. He's also the type of player where if like he's playing 100%, like he's totally locked in, he's got the playoff experience. Maybe that last game of the season goes a bit differently if he's actually at 100% and like totally in sync with his teammates. And he just never really seemed like he got there when he did come back on the court. I mean, it was kind of a rush job there at the end of the season. So I think that they can play just enough defense. I absolutely worry about Jokic as a matchup guy in the playoffs. I think you can go at him and exploit him, no doubt about it. But I think during the regular season, they've got enough firepower on offense. And I also like, potentially having Will Barton as that starting 3 with the other 4 guys, Harris, Murray, Millsap, and Jokic. I mean, that's a lot of different guys who could score on you in different ways. You know what I mean? They've got multiple playmakers, guys who can pass the basketball with Jokic and Millsap. Murray can run a little bit of offense. You've got Barton and Harris just running all over the court, kind of creating chaos. I mean, to me, that's a pretty darn good 5-man group. And they didn't play very much together last year, but their, on-off numbers with that group were just amazing, like really, really good. So, I guess boil it down. I see them in the playoffs. I see them in sort of the maybe the 5 to 6 range in the playoffs, and that would be a smash success for that team because they've been trying desperately to get back into the postseason for years now.
Yeah, 5 or 6, like that's a huge win for them, right there in the 5 or 6 seed. But it's also a huge win.
Let me guess, gelato.
Gelato, it's the best. It's anytime you have gelato, you're winning that day. I'm sorry, it cheers you up, it makes you happy, it heals all wounds. I'm telling you, it might even improve your defensive skills. So maybe Denver should reach out to my friends at Gelateria Uli's in downtown LA. Got all the best flavors, seasonal. They always have something new and exciting there. I'm kind of an old school guy. I like to just sort of stick to my ways, and that's Speculoos cookies. I'm petitioning to change that to Moe's Speculoos cookies. I don't think that will ever happen, but I'm going to keep trying. I highly recommend it if you're in downtown LA, in the Spring Arcade, on Spring Street, in between 5th and 6th Street, and they have a second location by the Beverly Grove. It's Beverly and Crescent Heights, I believe. I should probably find out where exactly that is before I plug it next time. But I highly recommend Gelateria Uli's. Let's go to the last division, and we'll probably run through it pretty quickly. We're talking about the Southwest Division. Who do you like in that division? Houston's the top dog. We know nobody's going to catch them. Besides Houston, who else do you like?
That really might be it. Who else do you like?
I'm very intrigued by Memphis, to be honest.
Oh.
I think if Memphis can stay healthy, which is a big if with Connolly and Gasol, right, and their history. But if they can stay healthy, I think they're a playoff team. I like what they did. I like, Jaren Jackson Jr., who I'm just going to start calling Triple J. I like him. I think he's somebody that they can kind of bring along slowly, and having that opportunity to learn under Gasol and those guys. I think I'm constantly worried about Parsons' health. I almost have him as anything he gives is a bonus because I have such little expectations from him. But I do like some of the guys they brought in. I think, Slow-Mo, Anderson from San Antonio is a good get for them. I like Garrett Temple, who they got. I think, I like that squad. I think they can actually be a playoff team if everybody stays healthy.
Well, I really appreciate you going out on the limb. I can't do it. I can't get out there with you. I have questions about coaching staff, questions about organizational culture, questions about buy-in, direction. I think that because they're in that smaller market, they kind of skate a little bit on some of the scrutiny that might go on in other places. But if that Marc Gasol thing, for example, blows up in Los Angeles, imagine how much attention it would have gotten compared to how much attention it got. Chandler Parsons, he's absolutely frustrated Grizzlies fans by his inability to stay on the court. I think he would be like that Steve Nash level pariah, in LA.
Right.
Remember when he was going through his health issues? He would just be kind of mocked constantly. And I think my question with the slow-mo factor is I really liked him in San Antonio. I actually thought San Antonio should have really considered just paying him and keeping him. But he is the type of player who really needs to be put into a system that understands his limitations. He's not a shooter. He's a really just crafty ball handler, but going one-on-one off the dribble, that's not really going to work for him. He's got some pretty serious offensive limitations. Is Memphis going to be ready to put him to good use, or is he going to look like a different guy outside the San Antonio system? That's a question that I have. Obviously, Conley is kind of the straw that stirs the drink. If he's out there for 65 games, okay, you can talk me into them being sort of in that playoff bubble. If he's not, I don't see any way they do it. To me, if I was a Grizzlies fan, I would be thinking less about the playoffs and more about starting like a Jaren Jackson Jr. fan blog. I think he's going to be a very, very special guy. I think he's got all defensive potential down the road. I think he, could potentially be an all-star guy, say 4 or 5 years. Body's incredible. His understanding of the game, how he moves is great. He looks super duper modern. He's just unbelievably long. So I'm totally in on him, but I just think it's more of a long-term project, and just seeing his development in year one is sort of the main thing I'm looking at from them. I don't have a ton of short-term expectations for them.
Fair enough. Like I said, I'm going to stick by it. But if one of those guys gets hurt, then I'm going to probably have to back off. New Orleans, you don't think New Orleans can make the jump back into the playoffs?
I think they're going to be solid. I think they're going to be in that fight for that 8th seed. I mean, to me, it could come down to like them versus San Antonio. Davis, the way they unlocked him down the stretch last year was so incredible and so much fun to watch. I really hope that they can kind of hit the ground running with that style of play, like with or without Rondo, and just keep it going. Holiday healthy was a revelation. I mean, it was so nice to be kind of reintroduced to him as an all-star level guy. But they're kind of in the same position they've been in recent years, where like the supporting guys aren't that great. I think they fit a little bit better together, this group, than they did a couple of years ago, and they've gotten rid of some of the truly weak links, like the guys who were just taking up roster spots, like Ashik and all those guys who for years were kind of holding them back. But I just don't think if you're a 2-man team, you can be like a top 5 seed in the West. Like unless one of those guys is LeBron. I think you've got kind of a hard ceiling there. So I see a little bit of regression from them this year compared to where they were last year. I would be very impressed if they win a series again.
How do you see Julius Randle fitting into that squad?
No, I think he fits really well. I mean, the underrated storyline for them for last year is everyone was going crazy talking about Anthony Davis and DeMarcus Cousins, that pairing. But Davis and Mirotic was a way better pairing. Like they played so much better with those two guys. The on-off numbers made it clear that like just having Davis with the right kind of complement around him where they can run and he's got somebody who does the dirty work is way better than having him alongside another superstar big. I think Randall can fit in very similarly to that. I mean, he's going to be comfortable getting up and down the court. I think the big issue is he can't really shoot the 3. And so I think if it was my preference, I'd use him as the 3rd big. As kind of a battering ram off the bench, and I would use Mirotic as the starting 4. But I think that there's going to be times where he's a very effective small ball 5 for them. Like I'd play him at center when Davis is off the court. That way you can kind of keep your pace like all game long. Sort of like, teams like to, keep one of their superstar ball handlers on the court at all time. That's how I would sort of handle, their bigs as well. So I think that was a smart move for them. I think he's got a chance to be, just as big of an impact player as Rondo was. I thought Rondo was a little bit overrated down there last year in terms of what he was doing. I think he was a real beneficiary of having a guy in Davis who could just dunk everything you throw to him. So I did like that move, but I still viewed their overall summer as kind of a sideways summer rather than a step forward.
Right. And then last team I'll ask you about is San Antonio. I know we've touched on them a few times, but with the addition of DeMar DeRozan, you still think they struggle to get into the playoffs? I think they're. To me, I think they can make the playoffs. I think with just considering the fact that last year they made the playoffs and barely had Kawhi, I feel like I know they're going to be the mid-range special squad. I still think with Pop and me, I can't really go against them too often. I got to think they're a playoff team.
I would hope that they make the playoffs, but I'm not sold on it. I think it's not just a matter of losing Kawhi in the trade, but look at all the other players who they've lost. The institutional knowledge, the IQ, the chemistry, all the depth even, all the stuff that's kind of made the Spurs really went out the door this summer. I mean, you're talking about Kawhi Leonard, Manu Ginobili, Tony Parker, Kyle Anderson, and Danny Green. I mean, that's 5 guys, basically who are championship type players for that group, right? I mean, that's half the rotation. And I understand Manu and Tony are not who they were, but Manu is going to be a lot better than whoever's replacing Manu. You know what I mean? And you can go right down the list of those guys that I mentioned and say, look, DeMar can't pick up the slack from Kawhi, let alone the slack from all those other guys. You know what I mean? That's asking way too much from any one player, unless it's LeBron or KD or Steph. Like no one else is going to be able to handle that kind of an impact. And so I think they're going to be in situations where they try to ugly the game up. They try to win with defense. Their offense is still kind of sputtering and it's kind of hit or miss some nights. DeMar is going to get his individual numbers. I think LaMarcus is going to get his individual numbers, but to me, I think that they're going to be, closer to a 500 team than they are towards like, that 52, 53 win team. And I think that just puts them right there on the bubble. And it's not even that, if they miss the playoffs, it would be stunning because it's San Antonio to miss the playoffs. But to me, it might not even say that much about them. It could just say more about the quality of the other talent around the league.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Hey, we went a little long, but Ben, tell everybody where they can find you. We didn't go into it because I know you've talked about it at probably at nauseum, but you've talked about it quite a bit. But the great, SI Top 100 list that you and Rob Mahoney did together. Just tell everybody where to find you and what you got coming up next.
Yeah, no doubt. It's NBA preview season, so we're at si.com/NBA. You can check out all of our preview coverage that I'll be going here for the next 3 or 4 weeks. Be sure to check out the NBA preview issue, which will be hitting newsstands in a couple weeks as well. It's the Open Floor podcast on Apple Podcasts, iTunes, wherever you get those podcasts. And I'm on Twitter at Ben Golliver, BenGolliver. That should do it for the plugs, Mo. Thanks for having me, man.
Oh, no, my pleasure. And let me just say, you got to listen to the Open Floor podcast. It's the best basketball podcast, and the chemistry between you and Sharp is amazing. It's something that pretty much every podcast probably aspires for. So make sure you check out the Open Floor podcast and follow along with Ben and Andrew. Thank you again, Ben, for coming on.
Thanks, man. We'll talk.
That's it for our show. Be sure to rate us, like us, leave reviews on Google Play, iTunes, SoundCloud, Stitcher, wherever else you go to listen to your podcast. And check out all our content on thejumpball.net.